clap when we talk about the end.
Okay, we're good.
Great. No, Larry isn't going to be here. So. All right, I'm calling the meeting to order. Attendance, please.
Supervisor Holdridge.
Here.
Councilmember Ardisana.
Here.
Councilmember Becker.
Here.
Councilmember Portman.
Here.
Councilmember Dysinger is absent.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Right. So we have one thing that we're going to be talking about today. It's going to be a large topic that goes hand in hand with our comprehensive plan process. We have to talk about zoning. So with that, we have our lovely attorney here to take it away for the most part. She's going to kind of run it a little bit, ask us questions about our thoughts and opinions on some of the things that were in the plan and that have to do in conjunction with the zoning situation. So Liz, you want to
Sure.
take it away?
So as the board is aware, the Comprehensive Plan Committee has issued a draft comprehensive plan, which we have acknowledged receipt and are starting our review process for that. You authorized your planner, Kristen O'Donnell, and you authorized to start preparing the seeker documentation. And then you've authorized me to start drafting the zoning. I've started going through the zoning code, but before I go and type in everything that I want, I'm not the elected official. So I want to make sure I have an understanding of what this board wants, what's palatable, so that I can be most efficient in my drafting time. So a couple of things. I circulated a memo a few weeks ago where I've gone through the plans. I've highlighted some recommendations. So today I'm going to go through some of those points on the memo. I've gone through the areas that I need to ask you for specific guidance on and what your thoughts are. The second thing I've done, because I've taken your existing code and put it into a format that I can edit it more easily and work with it, I've gone through and these are the things that I'm finding on my quick 30-second glances that I want to draw your attention to. I have not circulated that previously. I'll go with that. Some of them I'm not going to bring to your attention because they're just, inconsistencies or typos that I will go through and fix. But I do want to go through a fair amount, take notes, and then I can go back to the drafting table. I can then circulate, drafts and highlight changes as we go. So stop me at any point. Remember that the draft comprehensive plan is now the town board's document. So I would, each of you read it, annotate it. If you have questions, comments, you don't like statements, it's a recommended document, but you can edit it in any way you see appropriate. I would just, if there's rationale, make sure you give me and Kristen the rationale why, yes, the committee said this, but we want such and such change for whatever that reason is, not just we want the change. Okay.
And then Liz, if you could too, and I know you will, just make sure if there's anything from a legal perspective that's in there that you advise us of that, because.
Well, that's some of what this is.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So let me just jump right into this and stop me at any point. And I'm going to fling a lot. My anticipation is to try to keep this under 2 hours. I think that at 2 hours, I hope I finish in 2 hours. If
you need to, I got to cook dinner at 4.
Well, meetings like this tend to lose productivity right around the 2 hour mark.
2 hour mark,
so
exactly.
We start going a little
punchy.
Woo. Okay.
Pay attention, Brandon.
I am.
2 hours.
I'm sorry?
I think you were.
I was not.
You're welcome.
I think that was Linda or Bob.
What?
Somebody.
Oh, yeah, it's me. I'll put it
Pen
down.
cookie.
That was me this time.
Okay.
It was you last time too, but
It was not. Linda had my pen.
So, couple of things. One thing I always do whenever I look at a zoning code is I look at definitions. I will be going through this because sometimes the only instance of a term is in the definition section, and I'll word search a defined term, and see if it appears anywhere else. If it doesn't appear anywhere else, I'm deleting the definition because it is completely useless. Okay. Sometimes things that are found throughout your zoning code aren't defined terms, and that leaves questions as to what does that mean. I would like to draw to the review your, I have here, review your bed and breakfast definitions. It's limited to 4 guest rooms. We might want to take a look, and if that's of interest to the board, I can take a look at bed and breakfast versus inns versus hotels, and that as well as impact on short-term rental Airbnb. So I don't know if that's something the board wishes me to go down. I certainly can if the board wishes. Any thoughts on that?
Well, we're looking to adopt a tax for the Airbnb and the hotel, so I would think it would probably we should go down that and just
Okay.
go through it and just make sure we're.
There could also be locations that have more bedrooms also. So a lot of Airbnbs on larger homes, they have.
And some of it is just reviewing for consistency. So for example, often a bed and breakfast may be X number of bedrooms. An inn is X plus 1 number of bedrooms over. Sometimes, and I've seen this in a couple of towns, somebody well-meaning or the definitions are created at different times. It says, okay, 4 bedrooms, and then an inn is anything over 6. Well, what happens when you have the 5 bedroom, or what happens when you have something in between that doesn't fit? So do the
More
2
generic.
definitions touch so that nobody's lost in the middle? So I will review, and I'm just taking notes here to review, and I'm going to say B&B inn, hotel, and as well as short-term rentals for consistency and uniform, appropriate treatment. Okay. The next one, building coverage versus lot coverage. Doesn't sound like much of a distinction, but it's a huge distinction. So building coverage is how much of a lot can the building itself cover. Lot coverage could entail more impervious surfaces, driveways, roads, things of that nature.
A lot of that is addressed from this committee also.
Well, there's a little bit of it in, and I think if you look at can I just steal that from you, Tom, since mine's in little teeny tiny on my. Well, this is where the problem is. And that's kind of why I highlighted. Right now you have development coverage. There's no definition of what development coverage is,
Okay.
right? Is it building coverage? Is it lot coverage?
We
So,
wanna combine all of that.
well, we want to make sure that we're referring to the appropriate term. And then you also want to make sure that depending on how you define it, and I actually had this happen in another municipality, if you're using the broader lot coverage, your percentage is going to be higher. If you are using the more narrow building coverage, your percentage is likely going to be lower. So the percentage, you want to be careful how you categorize it, because you may need to alter those percentages based on how you define it.
We want to clarify that
Yeah.
for the planning board and for the building inspector.
Okay. So, clarify, is there any particular preference of the board in terms of that, or is that one where you go, I trust you and Kristen?
I trust you, Kristen.
I think the thought process on this was the impervious
Surfaces.
Okay.
things, that everything's included. I mean,
Include
that was-
impervious
that was
surfaces,
what
okay.
this whole zoning thing was about. Well, part of what it was all about was make sure all impervious
Okay.
things were covered.
Yeah. It can have you don't realize the percentage, and then all of a sudden you realize that it's much more restrictive than you intended, or much less restrictive than you intended. So I just want to include impervious surfaces under coverage definition.
And that also speaks to what they would need for, holding, detention and everything else for different projects if it's necessary. Especially if you're doing a development and you got to put, some type of a storm system in, then you need to take into consideration all the impervious things that are going to drain
Right,
into
typically, yes. Typically, yes. Okay. All right. This one, the next one, we've had a couple of discussions about filling and grading. I do want to draw the board's attention that you do have a removal and excavation of topsoil provision that's found at 98-12. Okay.
That's something we're looking to get upgraded also.
Right. I think Councilman Dysinger was treating it as a standalone separate local law. I don't think you need to do that if we're doing the zoning. I think you can incorporate
Okay.
provisions there.
But we just want to make it a little more,
Yep. And then I also have a note here, because the very next section after 98-12 is 98-13, which discusses your stormwater runoff. Interestingly, your highway superintendent has review authority on that. I don't know why. Under 98-13, I have a question here. Why is the highway super reviewing it?
Who would it normally be? The building engineer?
Town engineer or building inspector?
So why don't we
maybe
just
it's-
change it?
Maybe it's just something that
That's just,
he would be additional to the engineer and stuff, because he would have a say in what's taking place. I think that may have been something that was put in years ago
yeah, I
to
just,
cover the highway superintendent, because he may have been left out at times.
but I read it and I'm pulling it up now. So I'm talking from a place of knowledge. Give me 1 second. I read it as the highway superintendent is the reviewing and sign off authority. And no. It's outside of John's statutory authority. So I just want to clarify that as well. Yeah. Storm. Hold on 1 second. Give me 1
Will
second.
there also be any type of updates to the fines?
Yep.
Okay, because I think there's an issue right now with the village that some of their fines are so low, you have people that are just violating across the board because the
Businesses.
fines are less than it would be for them to be held up on a project. And it's
The-
becoming an issue.
The biggest, and let me just make a note of that so I remember that. And I think, one thing I want to work on doing is, as I draft this, is consistency. And a lot of times, local laws that affect the zoning code are adopted, I don't want to say piecemeal, but one particular issue. And there are fines related to that. And that gets baked into this section. And then there's a violation section. And then there's another section relating to, and different fines apply to different things.
That's-
And I like a very consolidated code. That's just my personal style. So I would go through, find all the enforcement provisions and put that in one article.
Yeah.
All the enforcement provisions. Same thing with public hearing, so that the public hearing standards are the same, consistent throughout the code. So let me just address fines. The one issue with, you just have to be mindful of, and I can certainly provide you a memo on that, is when we look to fines, one of the reasons the fines are relatively low is because it ties into the penal law. And when you get into the penal law, once you hit a certain point, you've now classified it as a misdemeanor. So there's a violation, a misdemeanor, felonies of various.
But what other options do we have to make? people
You can make it a
comply?
misdemeanor. There's just,
That's becoming an issue. People are just
Yeah.
not complying because it's just easier for me to bypass all of this. I'll pay a fine and just leave me
Yeah.
alone.
Could we all? could- I
well,
mean,
you can also put restoration, and that's the expensive part, and that doesn't,
Well, that's
is that the
something we
same,
need to do.
is that levying the month, is that the same thing as levying their taxes? We're allowed to do that?
so, not necessarily. You do have to have a statutory basis to levy taxes, like a property maintenance, where you give them notice, fix it, okay, you didn't fix it, It's kind of like the Bender situation, the 19 Cardinal Lane situation we have ongoing right now, is we've given them an opportunity to fix it. We gave them notice. We gave them a hearing. They didn't do it, and the cost of our efforts will be levied. But there are situations where you can, but you have to make sure that that process has appropriate statutory, appropriate due process, public hearings, things like that, which we can certainly talk about whether appropriate. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to find, give me 1 second.
I think whatever we do, we don't have enforcement, nothing we do makes, doesn't make any sense.
Yes, so I just, under your code, going back to your stormwater runoff. It was adopted in 2007. This says the town highway superintendent and the town engineer shall be stormwater management officers. 2007, and that's in 9813A1. I just thought that was, it was one of those quickie, I'm going through very quick,
But didn't we kind of put John Queen in as our, for our MS4, he is our
Yeah.
agent.
He makes,
in regard to
the
MS4.
town engineer
It's
makes,
They go hand in hand, I think, stormwater runoff and
Right.
MS4 are the same thing.
the town engineer doesn't bother me at all. As I'm reading this, and look, I don't represent your planning board, so I don't have my hands on this code on a regular on a daily basis. I'm reading and I went, it's one of those.
Is that not the norm for other?
It's a little odd that your highway superintendent is reviewing stormwater. Certainly a highway superintendent would review for impacts to the highway system and whatever. I just thought it was a little odd. Okay, let me get back into
I
my
think
notes.
it may have been something of a positive thing back in the day when Anthony was in that position, because he went to all the planning board meetings, he went to all the town board meetings, and he was aware of everything that was going on. So in that instance,
Okay.
the sign off would have been a positive thing there.
All right. So just wrapping up the stormwater conversation, I'm a big believer that stormwater controls and land development activity go hand in hand and that they should speak to each other. So that's going to be one of my key things that I look at and make sure the stormwater controls are consistent. So again, that's what I'm looking at. Okay. Short-term rentals, I may pull short-term rentals out of zoning and just have it as a separate standalone chapter. Because that's a style thing but I may do that. So don't look at me. Couple of things. Do you know your planning board doesn't technically exist, or at least not in your code? Because you have to create a planning board. Now, you are not the first municipality I have had where there was no creation language. So I have language that the planning board as it currently exists is hereby authorized to do X, Y, Z. So I will put that authorization in there.
Michael, congratulations, you don't exist.
Okay. I'm going to jump down to the big one. This was the biggest issue I think I've found in your zoning code, and this is a business decision for the board. Typically, the planning board is a product of state law. The state law authorizes the town board to implement planning. You can have a planning board. The town board could do the planning procedures. I'm certainly not suggesting that. And there are three basic functions that a planning board can serve: subdivision review, site plan approval, special use permit. Your code has 6 references to special use permit, loosely, okay? Doesn't identify what special uses are, but then has no procedure for special use. So effectively, you have no special use procedures. I would encourage you to evaluate whether we have special permits, because special permits are the more detailed uses. If you go look at other municipalities, and I'm certainly happy to where there's specific standards that a project has to meet. And those are the more regulated uses. So most permitted uses, particularly in the commercial realm, those need site plan approval. Okay, that's the minimum approval they need. But the special use permit adds another layer. But what it does is authorize you to impose reasonable conditions. It gives you more discretion in it to the planning board, at least, to whether that particular application goes through.
Would any of this be referenced over to ZBA?
No, not necessarily. Not necessarily. And there are some municipalities which have two types. They have a special permit and they have a conditional use. For example, the Village of Warwick has that, where the village board, the legislative body, has authority over special use permits, and the planning board has authority over conditional use. I can tell you, the folks at NICOM, which is the equivalent to villages, as is the Association of Towns, do not recommend that the legislative body have planning approval. That's you're treating it from two different standards. So, and I certainly, if you're going to give the authority to the planning board, you have to trust your planning board to do.
We just got to make sure that any special conditions that are applied by the planning board are put on the front page or whatever of whatever document finalized
let
that
me-
project, so the
so-
building inspector has them for the future.
So let me pull up. So for example, I'm going to pull up Town of Warwick Code, just to give you an example. And so right now you don't have a list. So normally your use table, right? You'll have a use table. It will say this use is permitted site plan. This use is a special use permit. This use is prohibited, whatever that may be. So just give me 1 second.
I'm sorry, I'm blocking you out.
That's all right.
I'm leaning around you. And he's climbing on the table.
So I'll just read the definition that's in the town code, because I think a land use which is deemed permissible within a given zoning district or districts, but which may have the potential to exhibit characteristics or create impacts incompatible with the purposes of such district. The special use shall therefore be subject to approval by the planning board in accordance with the conditions set forth for such use, as well as other applicable provisions of this chapter. Both general and specific conditions have been established for special uses to ensure that such use is in the harmony with the town zoning law and the Town of Warwick comprehensive plan, and will not adversely affect the neighborhood if requirements are met. So let me just keep going.
And what we're seeing in the new zoning now, because they have a little blurb in
Mhm.
there with Sugarloaf and going through a review board in Sugarloaf to
Right.
do certain things with.
So if you look at
Within the
Warwick's use table, they've got a table that says it's a, P is a permitted use but requires, site plan. S is a special use.
So clarify, so it's actual
Mhm.
things. You label all of those things or just generically say these type of things?
So it gives you that other layer. So I would strongly encourage the board to consider adopting a special use provision. And if you're not going to adopt a special use provision, eliminate the reference from your code. Because I think somebody's copied and pasted provisions from other codes where it was a special permit, and there's it's just there.
So we should probably adopt.
I think anything that we can clarify within the zoning and the codes to, again, to help the building inspector and help the planning board get through processes, because if it's there in our code, it has to be followed.
So we should come up with some sort of code for it, right? Well, both are sitting here. What's your thoughts on it? You're going to be the governing person to you guys.
The more clarity you have, the easier it is for them to do their job.
So I guess that's
So
our
if
answer.
it's in writing, it's simple. If it's
Yeah,
vague
no,
and
That and
generic,
under state
then
law.
it's left for interpretation. We want to avoid interpretation.
That and under state law, excuse me, I'm sorry. Special uses must have a public hearing. So it doesn't allow your planning, in some, lower level applications, your planning board may say a public hearing isn't required. Special uses require that public hearing. So that's another further regulation.
Would
on-
that go in conjunction with the whole process
Mhm.
with?
But that's a state
planning
law
board?
thing. I would
Okay.
repeat it in your zoning code so everybody has it at their
Okay.
fingertips.
But would that be a special public hearing, or would it be the same public hearing when you're finalizing a project?
It's all in the, you can
All the
hold
same
them
thing. Okay.
simultaneously, yeah.
Just
But it,
minimize complication.
thank you. As I like hack and gag on the microphone.
Oh. Yeah, oh geez.
Are you all right?
No, we're just talking about. Yep.
So there's a whole procedure if that, and we can go through what uses are appropriate for, special use.
What's that?
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
So for example, I'll give you an example. Home occupations, Warwick has a 3-tiered, and I'm not saying this to copy Warwick, has a multi-tiered home occupation. The light stuff, you go to the building department and say, hey, I have a home occupation. The bigger stuff, they have to go get a special use permit because they're in a residential zone, the guy that's selling Amazon out of their, their garage and that kind of stuff.
Or you have a landscaping company. or something like that,
Exactly,
that's using up
exactly.
The entire yard, so there has to be a distinction on.
So we can go through and, what
That's-
uses,
that's
and you
all
do
helpful
have,
to- That's all helpful to the building inspector.
you do have a number of uses that have specific regulations. I would start there. And let me just, give me 1 second. So table of use requirements. So just looking, let me see if I can find a special permit. So for example, somebody wants a guest house, it's a special permit. Mobile home courts in certain districts, special permit. So that's all business decisions for you, but I at least would put the groundwork in for a special permit. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead, consensus is to go ahead with special permits.
Yep.
Special.
I just sent you a message.
Two amendments, okay. All right. Public hearing provisions, again, not a huge deal, but I do recommend you make them consistent between planning board, ZBA. There's nothing worse as an applicant's attorney when one thing is 300 feet, one thing's 500 feet. Make them consistent. Pick a number, whatever it is, be consistent. Okay. Does anybody have any general objection to that?
No.
No,
Could
no.
be.
Okay.
Is there a recommended number? No?
I've seen anywhere from 300 to 500 feet. What do you guys now for planning? Do you know? Okay. But I'll make them consistent. Make consistent. My other question for you, and this does add a little bit of a cost to the applicant, and is very common in places like Westchester and Rockland, less common in Orange County. Do you want a sign notice? And what I mean by that is that when an applicant comes before the board, they put one of those signs in the yard that says this property is the subject, and there's a text that this property is subject to an application. Sometimes it sets forth the public hearing, but
I like that.
nobody sees your notice in the public paper. I can guarantee you.
That's why
No-
I like that.
So you like the sign?
Yeah,
the sign for what type of projects? Just residential,
You can-
commercial, or
you can
what are we
make it-
covering?
So you can make it for anything that comes before your planning board and ZBA. That's usually what I see it for. You're not going to do it for like a single family home that just
So
needs
it's
a
gonna be a
building permit.
project that's before the planning board.
Correct.
Say for, site plan approval or anything like that. I mean, that's a positive thing, because that's the beginning of the step. Say, you have a sign, we're gonna put it out here, this property is gonna be developed, and it gives people a heads up
Maybe more people come
without-
to the public hearings.
without
if they have
worrying
a- have a
about
voice.
seeing a public notice in the paper.
Correct.
Yeah.
They could follow if it's something they're
I'm-
interested in.
I'm good with
You like those. So
Yeah.
I can, and the
That's
code
all.
would have language in it that says the sign has to be this big, has to say this much.
We
But-
provide,
People drive past, if somebody's driving past a property at the same time over and over and over again, and usually it's like a 4x4 sign. It's this big. Somebody has to see it, and they go, even if they can't read what's on it, they go, something's going on. Let me call over to the planning. Let me call Melissa Foote and find out, has something been applied for, and then they can come in and
same as you see when they're buying a piece of commercial property, but coming soon.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that would be paid for by an applicant? or-
that's paid for by the applicant.
And we would designate what we want to see on that sign.
Now,
So we have to have language of what we
Yep.
want to see.
and I have
present.
that. I have that language. Very common in Westchester. Less common here. It depends on how aggressive you want to be.
Well, we got to clarify
just-
what projects we want it on.
I would honestly, I'd do all site plan special use. Site
Okay.
plan special use. You probably subdivisions because that's a fairly
Okay.
big project.
So all projects,
It-
just
Anything
not-
coming before the planning board and the ZBA.
Okay.
And make that
Even the
consistent.
ZBA, because if it's a small project or just bigger project, because you could have a resident come to ZBA, they're gonna have to foot the bill for a sign because they're going before ZBA.
That's again a business decision for the board.
Okay, because that's,
It's hard to distinguish. Okay, somebody's coming for.
I've got a swimming pool that I don't have room in the backyard. I want to put it in the side yard. Now they're gonna put a 4x4 sign up to say I'm before the planning board for a swimming pool. Or I think that's
Okay, so we can talk about.
that's above and beyond what this is designated to do. And that's an undue burden or hardship on a resident to have to do that.
Types of
So that has to
applications
be
which are
clarified
subject
somehow.
to signage. Okay, we can certainly talk about
Okay.
that. And maybe you make it that ZBA applications that are not otherwise subject to site plan approval don't need a
Okay,
sign.
That's fine. I just don't want it for
Yeah,
every
no, I
single thing
understood.
that goes
Just
before the
everybody
ZBA.
generally,
Yeah.
ZBA applications not otherwise subject to site plan or special use. Not applicable, okay. Okay. I'm actually, this may not be 2 hours. Okay. Does everything I'm saying make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So I do want to go through that memo, that table I circulated earlier with respect to the comp plan. In addition to, I do ask everybody to go through and make sure everybody's comfortable. I know not the whole board was participated in the comp plan process. So just look at it. If there's something that we think needs to be changed, we should look into that. All right. So as I said in the memo, I do anticipate the following coming out of the comp plan, whether they all happen at once simultaneously or whether they come in as a series of local laws. The first is the zoning code amendments, which will include, which I think should include provisions for historic preservation and review, as well as the grading and filling. You already have a section there that I think can be manipulated to,
We just have to enhance it.
yeah, and rework it a little bit. There are calls for changes to your subdivision code. I will tell you, in my experience, the subdivision code is like the lost child. Everybody forgets about the subdivision code. They adopt this grand comp plan. They adopt the zoning amendments, all beautiful. And then we have a subdivision code from the 70s. A lot of there's discussion in the comp plan about clustering. That's largely in your zoning code. And so this is where I want to make sure that the zoning code, the provisions for clustering and zoning code and the provisions in subdivision talk to each other, and they're not inconsistent. So we just need to be aware of that.
Now, is there stuff in the state as far as that we follow also when it comes to clustering? There's guidelines to be followed from the state?
So clustering is authorized by the enabling, what we call the enabling statutes, the zoning statutes in town law, and they set forth a minimum. Clustering has to be done by local law. So you've already done some
We
clustering.
adopted it so it can take place here.
Yeah, you do have clustering here in the town. There are recommendations for some revisions to the clustering scheme, which is fine. But again, clustering is a byproduct of subdivision.
And clustering at this point is, the way it's written, I think, is now based on usable property, not the property at large, because you could have parts of that property that cannot be developed. So you can't incorporate that on
I
the
will
amount
make
of
sure
units you put into the cluster.
So what you're referring to is a yield plan.
Yep.
A yield plan is a developer would have to show, and I'm just based on usable. And that's the other thing, how do we define usable, right? Because
Yeah.
it's how, everything goes back
Well,
to a
if we got
definition.
wetlands, we know it's not usable.
Right, but you have to make sure
Yeah.
that that's in the,
Yeah. So that needs to be perfectly clarified also with clustering, so we don't get, overdeveloped in the cluster.
usable can be all sorts of things. Usable can be wet. Usable can be impacted by, is it wet? Is it steep? Is the bedrock, where does the bedrock fall in relate, how much?
That's all gonna come down to perks and everything else. So
Yeah.
engineering, so this could be referenced over to an engineer confirming whether it is
Mhm.
usable or not usable.
So we'll look
And
at the
slopes
definition.
should be directed by our code anyway. Beyond a certain
Right.
slope, you should not be building anyway.
That, and also you want to direct, okay. And the whole purpose of clustering is if you have a 10-acre parcel with 2-acre zoning, you can get 5 lots. You can get 5 conventional standard lots on that. And that doesn't assume usability.
There,
You make all those 5 lots smaller and you smush them off to the other side of the property
keep open space.
so that the rest stays open space. You want to smush them in a spot that is not necessarily ecologically sensitive. So the smush shouldn't happen on wetlands, steep slopes, areas where there are rock outcrops, other areas. You certainly, want to think about connections. The last thing you want to do is create little pockets of green. You want to create chains of green in open space, because if you just create little isolated parcels, they don't work together.
It's kind of like Ashford Estates had done here in the town of Chester and Surrey. They
Mm-hmm.
just did a strip of road, left everything down below.
So going back to the last 2 laws that I anticipate coming out of here are, and your comp plan doesn't say anything. I don't know if the board wants to add anything about property maintenance and the inclusion of property maintenance. I do think that's going to be a standalone local law. That's a business decision for the board.
We
Often
just
property
incorporate it
maintenance
during
is
the
one of
process.
those ties hand in hand with the comprehensive plan, and may be a good idea. I've certainly had municipalities with property maintenance and quality of life issues that you may wish to identify in your comp plan. That's a business decision for you. And I certainly, Councilman Dysinger had presented a draft local law. I have spent a fair amount of time,
Looking at it.
well, effectively, I want to say reordering it. And also, again, property maintenance, particularly if you want the ability for the town to go in and take over if a property owner fails to do so. has to have appropriate statutory due process protections.
Liz, is that separate and apart from the weed law?
It would amend the weed law.
It would.
I would think weed, littering, all
Yeah.
that fun stuff. Yeah.
Right, but it would expand upon.
I
Yeah.
think it's important to update that and make sure again that has some teeth in it, that it
Right.
actually can be enforceable.
I liken property maintenance and code enforcement, and I see our building inspector is here, to the biggest game of whack-a-mole you've ever played. So you try to
Let's simplify it, put her down in writing and
make it so that it has some teeth. And also,
that's a big quality of life issue
it also,
in certain areas of the town or throughout the town in developments and stuff where things are not maintained properly.
you want to be able to give the town with appropriate due process provisions, the ability, and weeds is the easy one. You have your notice, you send your guys in with the weed whacker, go cut the weeds. Same thing with trash. Trash is relatively easy. It's when you have larger scale problems, it becomes harder. So certainly that requires a good look. That I do anticipate will be a separate local law.
How about, what equal cars that are not registered, that are just sitting there? When I say sitting there, they got weeds growing out of them.
Yeah.
Unregistered.
So that's harder to do. Certainly, I know some of my other municipalities have struggled with that because you would love nothing more than to hook up and tow a car out of there. Can you essentially confiscate somebody's vehicle? That's a harder thing to do. So, but I will certainly keep note of that. I'm taking notes. Certainly, you can put in there that the maintenance of unregistered junk vehicles on property is grounds for violation in court cases.
And you can ride around and, you can see I've seen 5 or 6 cars with no plates on it and weeds growing out of the engine.
But if they do have plates, there's not a lot you can do unless you prove that they're unregistered.
Was
Yeah, the vehicles are tough. Now, the best option is if somebody, and I get it, there's some guys that have and gals, I don't want to be, have classic cars that are not necessarily street worthy and not registered, they're project cars, whatever, they got to be in your garage, or
That's hard.
cover them, cover them with a tarp that's in decent shape.
Okay, as part of the property maintenance, can you also reference the garbage cans?
Yes, that actually I have.
Because everybody, they should be removed within a certain, at least by the next day.
That
Yes,
and
that's
use of garbage cans. Lots of folks, and I know Chester, you guys can't just put a bag of garbage out on the street. It's got to be in a can. So garbage cans, that's actually already in mine.
And our process for our spring cleanup now is for them to call Interstate Waste to come and pick up. So people may put things out expecting them to come. They have to make an appointment now.
yes.
And that
Yeah.
stuff might sit out there for 2 weeks. And how can we avoid that?
Okay. Garbage cans.
It's not so much garbage cans, but it's the
using-
cleanup
The bulk,
materials,
the bulk.
And then
couches, refrigerators, whatever it might
leaving
be.
garbage, bulk pickup.
And I've had it where I've called them and it's usually within a week
I called them once, they told me 2 weeks.
Yeah,
Really?
we got complaints about 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Garbage pickup length of time.
Then Liz, as we're going through this process, is probably a good time, or there's a separate discussion on the sidewalks in Sugarloaf, the maintenance on them in front of
We
the
gotta move
homes.
to it.
That sidewalks in Sugarloaf, we certainly can, we're gonna want to do that faster. But sidewalks, maintenance.
Yeah, I also saw something in the zoning as far as a change that anything on Kings Highway, any new development on Kings Highway was going to be required to have sidewalks. Should it just be part of Kings Highway? Why would we need sidewalks on the entirety of Kings Highway?
Well, you can, going to the sidewalk question, you can set a district,
Yeah,
right? You can put an overlay, and there's all different types of districts. you can put an overlay district, or you can note on the map, anything in this zone, right, is required to install sidewalks upon a development. You can do that. You could also have anything in this section, right, and whatever that section may be, and whether it's Sugarloaf or other areas of the town that have isolated pockets of sidewalks, that they pay into a fund, something similar to a traffic light fund. So projects that may contribute but by themselves don't trigger the need for the installation of a traffic light, you pay into a fund. And then when another project comes along and now all of a sudden the traffic light is needed, you now have a pocket of cash to go pay for it. By the way, a traffic light's $400,000. I just discovered this.
Yeah, this what I'm referencing to, this is one of the zoning changes here
Let me see.
under LBA.
Where? Yeah. So, just as a general note, and I know volunteers created this, I will probably be changing. There's a lot of regulation by footnote. That's going to go in a lot of that's going to be taken out of here and put into the text.
Okay.
Um,
Because it's a footnote in there and, that concerns me.
That's going to
The way
get
it reads, it
lost.
says you must put, if you're going
Yeah,
to develop a property
no,
on Kings Highway, you have to have a sidewalk.
yeah, there's a lot of footnotes here. So we're gonna take a lot of these footnotes. I won't throw them out. They're just gonna get relocated into, because these are fairly substantive.
Yeah. Another footnote in there was no new quarries
That should go in your prohibited use.
Okay.
So
we got to be careful with that also, because you could have properties that need to be developed that require the removal of soil. And if it's a lot of soil, quarry might be necessary to remove the materials on that property, or can it be done by special use through the ZBA? I don't know.
Also, the other question, so I'm just gonna go back to the no new quarries, and I'm jumping around a little bit, but we're on a good train, so I apologize for the tangential thinking here. The no new quarries right now is listed on the proposed AR3 district use table,
It's also on the IP.
but is it everywhere? Or is
I
it
don't know.
so that's why I say like
Okay.
footnotes, because if it's intended everywhere, put it as a prohibited use.
Okay. But once you put that in, what does that do to the existing quarries that, there's two quarries
So-
now, does that make them non-conforming uses?
Yep, so
So they would have to go before, if they want to make any changes to their quarry or anything in the future, they got to go before the ZBA.
it depends.
Okay.
It depends. So I'm just, sidewalks maintenance and Sugarloaf. Linda, I'm gonna really rely on your minutes, because I'm trying to talk and take notes at the same time, and I'm not succeeding to be addressed in local law.
Give me plenty.
It depends on how you want to treat non-conforming uses. You have to give a property owner a reasonable. So one way is, and you're non-conforming, and you do have a non-conforming provision, and I'm going to look at it anyway, just as an overhaul of the code. When you have a pre-existing use, you adopt a new zoning code, you say, we really don't want any more of that use. We want to phase this out. That use gets to continue in its current iteration. There is often an expansion that they are entitled to expand no more than often 50%. They are entitled to replace if there is so say for example, there's a fire that doesn't totally damage the building. They're allowed to fix it and resume operation. But if they have a period of greater, and usually it's a year, maybe two, that use is deemed abandoned and
Then it
they
reverts back to the zoning.
they can't continue. The other option are for the uses that are so noxious, you're like, no, we want them gone. You create an amortization period where you say, this use is prohibited. You have 5 years to wind down this use. You can't say immediately, you got to give them time to adjust. That's fairly rare, but if there is a use that's completely obnoxious,
Yeah, I don't think we
I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
every every once in a while, somebody's got an old, tannery that's just in a really bad spot. And you change the zoning. So there's a couple of different ways of handling what we call pre-existing nonconformity. They might have slight expansion, not significant expansion, but there's all sorts of ways. So for you guys, if you're saying that there's you're done with no more quarries at all in the town of Chester, and we're treating them as a nonconformity, that's fine. If you're saying there's no more quarries in this specific district, let me know. Because then I will update the use tables
Okay.
to list as we would list as prohibited.
I just don't want to prohibit any particular property from being able to develop because they have so much, it makes it cost prohibitive to develop that property because there's so much removal that has to take place that they would never purchase that property or have any interest in it because, in order for them to remove the burden off of that, the material off that property would fall on them. If they could make money off it while they were doing it, then it makes it cost effective rather than cost prohibitive. There may not be many properties.
Arguably, so if you're talking about quarry overburden, like,
Well, not even over, but just if you have a hillside that nobody's going to build an industrial building on because it's on a hill, how are you going to remove that hill in order for that building to take place?
well, again, so this all comes down to definition. If you're coming in and you're like, I'm going to put a building there, and goes through full planning board approval. And again, rock cuts and all of that would go before the planning board and they would review the environmental impacts of that and on the site and whether it was appropriate. You removing the hillside for the purpose of making that happen, you're removing part of that for the purpose of making it happen. If you happen to sell that, there's nothing, it's like fill. If you're going into a site and there's fill and you say, okay, I'm going to go sell that fill to somebody I don't need the fill, I need it gone, and you want to sell that fill, that is not necessarily quarrying.
Okay.
Quarrying is I'm taking this piece of property, I'm going to
So that's
quarry it.
something that
Yeah.
that the planning board can look at and say, this is
That would be part
this
of the
is
planning
reasonable
board's
or
review.
unreasonable.
Yeah.
Okay. Either that or we change the
Now,
zoning on certain properties.
If you've got this beautiful flat piece of property and then you've got a rock outcrop and the only place you put a building and you've got this whole other piece of property, you're quarrying,
Yeah.
like if you've got a piece of property that's the only location this building can realistically and reasonably go, and I got to take out that and I'm going to do something with that rock, I'm going to sell that rock, I'm going to do whatever. I'm going to, turn it into, I'm making this up as I go. I'm not an engineer.
Yeah, no problem.
That's part of developing the property. That would be in your filling and grading law too, as well.
Very good. Just clarification, it sounds good.
Okay. All right. Okay. So going back to one of the recommendations is to refine the visual assessment criteria to guide the planning board review and assist them in blending the development into hillsides. I'll just pull that section 26.c.
That would become a special provision again to clarify all of that.
Yeah, so so just take a look at the 28-26C. Any new structure within the Ridge Preservation Overlay District shall be located to the maximum extent practicable so as to not be visible from any point on Pine Hill Road, Bull Mill Road, Black Meadow Road, or any state, county, or interstate highway. And if they can't be completely obscured, they shall be made to blend as unobtrusively. So you can't have, a lime green house on the hill.
MediaCom.
And then, there's an undefined acronym. I know what it is, but it's an undefined acronym, so I'm going to go define that. And in the subdivision process, the planning board has the right to require a visual impact assessment to evaluate potential visual impacts when they go to subdivide. It shall include a photographic study taken from designated vantage points or areas along those roads that I just listed. That there is a waiver provision of the code, of that particular code, when it determines that the site requirements are not going to be in play. So just take a look at that. But that was a recommendation of the comp plan. Okay. Okay. One of the main recommendations of Chapter 4 of the code, the town should encourage the use of local farms and review zoning to ensure a range of agritourism uses are permitted. I've said that the plan should specifically articulate that, but we should also, as a board, have a discussion of agritourism. So does everybody understand what agritourism is? I don't want to insult anybody's.
I like people who travel the farm.
It's converting. A lot of the farmers have converted their Pennings is a prime example where that property started off primarily as a farm. They've now converted a lot of it. Now they're still very much a farm, and actually it's multiple Pennings farms.
Then they started manufacturing or whatever else on
They've-
that property.
They've opened a cidery, and I'm using them, and I'm
It's a whole experience.
it's an experience. They've got their market, they got their ice cream, they got their Wright Farm is another form of agritourism. Some people love it. Some people, there is discussions and concerns. On a beautiful fall day, you go up Little York Road by the winery. And again, I live in Warwick, so I'm using Warwick examples. There's other, you can't get up that road. And that family does a great job of managing it and getting people off the road, but it's popular. And you have the traffic and other things like that. So the board should think about, and you don't have to give me a decision today, what is permitted, where can it be located, ag district, things like that. So we might want to coordinate with Kristen a little on that.
Because that agricultural really doesn't follow zoning.
To some extent. So yes, there are agricultural uses generally get preferable treatment under state law. However, that doesn't necessarily give them carte blanche to do whatever they want. A prime example of that was the Canterbury farm.
Yeah, the filling of property.
Yeah.
Well, that was extreme.
Well, but it also wasn't. So just because you're designated as an ag does not necessarily give you carte blanche. There are, and I do have a memo related to the impact of ag on building permits. So for example, you don't need the same, you don't need to meet the uniform code for your barn.
But in reference to that, we couldn't do anything until they lost their farm exemption. So
I highly disagree, but that's okay.
they weren't shut down until they lost their farm exemption. So
I
it's
think
kind of
that was more of a,
catch-22.
I think that was more of a, who was responsible for the enforcement.
Yep. Could
So,
have been shut down, just wasn't shut down.
correct. That's my takeaway.
What about, Ocean? Right here on Kingston
That would be-
Way?
that would be
an example,
type of-
right?
Type of ag, agritourism, any of the U-pick orchard, any of the U-pick orchards. I don't know, it might be helpful to have
So what type of controls would we try to put on that?
Hours of operation, noise,
Okay.
traffic.
So basic business references, basically. If you're going to run like a business outside of a farm, then we expect you to follow
Yeah, and
a
you
business
can,
platform.
you can see, again, I'm copying them, or not copying them, I'm citing them because I know them. But like, that's how it is. So like, and I would take a look at the code. This is in Warwick's code. Agritourism is defined as a set of activities that occur when people link travel with products, services, and experiences of agriculture. Agritourism is conducted for the enjoyment of education of the public and primarily promotes the sale, marketing, production, harvesting, or use of the products of the farm operation. Examples of agritourism include, but are not limited to, farm stays, farmcation experiences, hay rides, wine trails, farm tours, farm festivals, designed to support farm operations.
That also include farmers markets, something different.
That's something different, but you could have
Just theoretically, a farmer could say, I'm going to open my farm to other farmers that sell different products than I do, and let's do a
Mhm.
farmer's market here also.
so, and then let me just, so like in Warwick's code, agritourism businesses is a special permit use in the central business district.
So would anything like that require planning board approval, site plan approval?
It's a special
So it's
permit, yeah,
it's
it
a
requires,
process.
yeah. And then if that's 146J, 139, give me a second. 146J, give me a, 146. I said 139, right? Please don't make me flip. There's a regulation here about farm markets. Farm markets are subject to initial issuance and annual review of a farm market permit from the town building department. Farm markets are subject to, there's an annual fee. Farm markets less than 4,000 square feet in gross floor area may be operated as an accessory use to the principal use. So that's a farmer who has a small shop selling their
Products.
farm market structure shall not exceed 2,000 square feet for each 10 acres, right? If you've got a 10-acre farm, you don't need 100,000 square foot
Yeah.
farm market.
Not gonna fit anyway.
It's not going to fit anyway. There's a percentage of how much is grown there, 25% has to come from the farm. It can't just be, oh, I have a farm, I'm going to open a retail shop. There's a whole, so I'd suggest to take a look at,
So it's something we definitely have to address to.
yeah. There's this particularly regulates on-farm festivals. Some of the farmers and wineries and everything has a festival. They can only have so many a year, noise, hours of operations.
Would that also incorporate the Hand of Sugarloaf in something like this too with festivals, or is that something?
That's something
different?
separate. That's a
Different use.
different use, yeah. So just think about if there's anything and use examples nearby that, are either positive or problematic. So just, think about that and let me know how you want to proceed
And you
there.
also have the brew companies that are coming in on farms also, just like Johnson Farm. You have Long Lot Brewing,
Mm-hmm.
which is an accessory use to the farm.
So I think for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mirror a little bit of what Warwick has done, put it in front of you, and you can say, this is too far, or this is not enough, and we can tweak from there.
That's good.
Liz, the other thing, I don't know if that's something local law we'd have to pass, but this document wasn't taken off the shelf and the dust blown off it, I think from 2004 or 2006. Could we make sure that it's mandatory that every 7 years at least, or what we deem is the right time to do it? Because, from 2004 to now, the town has evolved a lot. And in 7 years, you're going to have more stuff evolving that that it's mandatory that this happens, guys, because some of us might not be here to make sure we're keeping that document, that's a working document, that we're updating it. And
Do a basic review, update.
yeah, listen, I think a lot of work went into it, but 7 years from now, it won't be that much work. From the early 2000s to now, you're talking, 20 years plus.
The recommended time, a comprehensive plan is not mandatory under state law, but once you have one, everything you do has to be consistent with it. The general guidelines that I've seen in my experience is that the comprehensive plan should at least be reviewed for updates every 5 to 10 years.
Right.
That's the general.
So that's just a range. So you put a range in there also to make sure it happens.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
Okay, I can put
Or
in.
if you want to do 7 years, that's within the range, and that
It's like in the middle of
it's going to be a
2001.
point of starting it after 7 years, because it may take
Another
a
year
year or
or
something
two
to get
to
through.
get it done.
Yeah,
So leave it at the 7 years and
okay.
give a specific time instead of
Because
generic.
there's a lot of work that's gone into this, or to open the thing up and have it that they got to go through it, or we got to go through it.
And once you have a major revision to your code, the 5 years should theoretically be much more incremental provision.
That's-
I recall Larry's request for it to be reviewed several times
Yeah.
over the past several years.
It should be,
And the time has gone by.
He started at the 7 year
Yeah.
time
He did,
process.
he
I
did,
think
yeah.
It was already done for 7 years. He kept saying it needs to be opened up.
it's one of those, you've got all these mandates coming from state law, New York, everything else. And it's an easy one to, and then when it's not there, or somebody comes in and says, hey, I want to do XYZ project, and you go, oh my God, that project is awful. Well, it's permitted under your
Well,
code.
and that's to that point. The gentleman sitting out here, that's a document they need to be able to do their job. So that's my whole thought
Correct.
process behind it. It's not going to be the big undertake that we just did.
All right. Give me a second. I'm finding my next highlighted point. One of the recommendations, and this is not necessarily in the zoning code per se, there might be some discussion that an applicant has to address this, but Chapter 8, there's a recommendation about assessment of communities, facilities, and capital improvements to meet those needs. So there is a discussion about assessment of town infrastructure, and what costs should be borne by the developers. So that's not necessarily a zoning issue, the assessment itself, right? The assessment is outside of that. But what we can put in the zoning is, requirements when a project comes before us, applicant to, or planning board to evaluate, and this gives it some teeth, planning board to evaluate sufficiency of water, sewer, whatever the infrastructure may be, that's one of the considerations that the planning board has to take up. Most times the applicant is dealing with that. Okay.
I think that's something that's covered anyway, but it should certainly be mentioned.
Yep. Now, there is a recommendation for a well testing protocol.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay. What I recommend on this one is that, and is that the well testing protocol itself be regulatory so that it can be amended more easily than amending it via a local law, right? But reference to a well testing protocol as may be adopted from time, amended from time to time. We can refer to it in the zoning code, but the well testing protocol, because it is more technical in nature and it's really a technical document, you probably want to look at that from a regulatory perspective. Well testing, you should be consulting with the hydrologist to develop well testing.
Do we not have a protocol?
I don't know.
Can I find one?
I don't know.
So would
I
that
think this
cover
all-
all wells? All?
Well, well testing protocols are usually implemented when the developer is coming in to prove to us you have the water. But because most of the town, there are some well water districts, but most of the town is on wells. You get a new subdivision in, are they going to draw down your neighbor's well?
Mhm.
How are they going to study those wells?
So it's-
Now, there is a fine line because while it's critical that you get that information, I've seen instances where a well testing protocol was used to effectively stop development. So,
Well,
But-
it comes down to the fact if you don't have water, how can you build?
well, it does, but how far do you have to prove a negative?
I mean, it comes down to the influences of others.
But like, so for example, I had a project in a nearby town that has a well testing protocol. And you have to monitor and you put monitors in your neighbor's wells, and one, you have to get permission from your neighbors.
Same thing
Right.
DEC does for water
Right.
taking permits for the towns.
But there's no impact on this well. What happens when the town says, okay, go to the next well, go to the next, how far out do you have to go to prove the negative?
Well, you could set a guideline.
You do set a guideline, but again,
There's, I mean,
how
DEC
far out is reasonable to go? Because you say, okay, you have
Wouldn't DEC already have guidelines? Because they do that for water taking permits now. When the Greens of Chester was doing their wells, they had to go to properties within a certain range. And there was, I
They-
think they went broader than that only because they wanted to basically, satisfy everybody. So they went as far as the Tetz property and everything else. But
I
they
would-
also had a well over there.
I would recommend, I know
Setting-
just enough to be dangerous. I'm a lawyer, not a hydrologist or an engineer.
setting-
If that's something that's of interest, that you reach out to, start with Kristen, but then I would go to
hydrogeology.
a hydrogeologist to develop appropriate. I have, they're valuable pieces of information, but I've also seen them go a little too far.
Okay.
So,
Something we could
yeah,
put together. And I guess the protection part of this is if you have a development coming in and they're going to do either individual wells or they're going to do a community well, we have to make sure
Mhm.
if something that's going to get turned over to this town, that it's not going to impact others and it's going to have adequate water for the future.
right.
Not with what we're dealing with down at Walt Lake Estates on a daily basis because they don't have the water in most instances of what they need.
Okay.
And they were even given a well back in the day that was 25 gallons a minute to put more homes in. It should have been a better well than that because now that well produces anywhere from 5 to 12 gallons a minute. It's not a well of value to put money into to redevelop it because you're not gonna get enough to make it worthwhile. So we
Yeah.
really gotta protect the town with anything that's gonna be turned over to us.
Yep.
So it's definitely a protection we have to look at. I think there's guidelines right now with the health department also.
Office coming back.
Individual homeowner wells are put in place that they have to go to a certain depth and everything else now.
Yeah.
So those protocols maybe should be followed also.
But again, that's a technical document that you should have technical advice on. All right. Jumping down to the next recommendation I have. Generally, the plan recommends that industrial park and office park uses should be limited to areas already designated for such purposes. Chester's Industrial Park has excellent transportation access from New York State Route 17 for light industry and warehouse distribution facilities. This light industrial park also has access to central water and broadband, which are prerequisites for many industries. New uses to consider in the area include a range of medical office uses, indoor and outdoor recreation uses, and facilities for film production. And my comment is the board will need to consider what uses are appropriate and then also appropriate definitions for those uses.
The
So,
other issue, we have no central rural water for industrial.
what water is serving the industrial park?
The industrial park, as it exists now, is served by the Village of Chester.
Okay.
The only building over there that is in the town is C&S, and they have a deal with the village to,
So they're an
Serve
outside,
water.
they're an
Yeah,
outside
they're an
user of the
outside
village
user,
served by village water. Okay, all right.
and most everything else in the town, as far as I know, has individual wells per business. You have USA, Coach USA, you have a few other businesses in that industrial park. They all have wells. They actually have issues with sodium in the wells.
Individual wells, okay. So the question is, if I look at your current zoning code,
I think you're running into the issue right now too with
can I
Valley
steal that?
Sports.
Can I steal that back again?
Valley Sports, I just saw that, something that came from the health department that said that they have an issue with sodium
Mm-hmm.
with their water also. Yeah, that's all through the health department and what they need to do to produce water for public consumption. So that doesn't really fall back on us, those individual buildings.
So, right now in the industrial park zone, uses requiring site plan approval, and some of these include proposed revisions. And again, all of this would have to be defined. The office buildings for business, medical, physical therapy, outpatient care, research and professional use, bed and breakfast inns per 78-29C, daycare centers and nursery schools, schools, vocational, automotive repair garage, commercial indoor recreation, health fitness facilities.
It's all within the I zone,
IP,
I think.
self-service storage, wholesale operations of a light industry nature. Blech. Say that 10 times fast. No, it says of a light industry nature. Sorry if I could speak today. Fully enclosed warehouse distribution centers, research facilities, experimental and testing laboratories, film production, sporting facility, newspaper and printing establishments, light industrial uses, including manufacturing, assembly, converting, packaging, altering, finishing, cleaning, or processing of other materials involving the use of only oil, gas, electricity, or equivalent. I'm gonna have to look at that one. Public utility structures, that's fine. Commercial lumbering, sawmill operations, large and small scale solar utilities, solar.
Now, do we have to make mention in our codes at all, the fact that the county for solar would like to be, or is that something that,
I'm sorry, say that again.
right now, I think the county, with all farms being taken up by solar, the county, I think, has requested of planning boards to send, have that sent over to them for review also, which wasn't done, which hasn't taken place in the past. Is that something we have to reference in our code or anything to make sure that takes place?
So it
Or that's
sounds
something-
like what you're describing, excuse me, is 239 review.
Yeah.
Which happens in relatively limited instances, but more often than not, any project that is within 500 feet of the border, 500 feet of a county or state highway, and there are other triggering provisions.
Okay.
So anything that would impact property that's within 500 feet, if you're within 500 feet of a park. So
Some of those triggers are over there, but if you're outside that trigger, I think.
it doesn't go, it doesn't go. And the county would generally not necessarily,
I think the planning board would reference that anyway. I'm just wonder if we should put something in there to make them aware of that instance.
I'd have to look at specific applications to see if there was a trigger to send it.
Okay.
Typically you only send it when there's a trigger to send it. Okay. So going back to the industrial park, are there any uses that, I know I rattled off a whole bunch of uses. Are there any uses that the board either strongly does not want or strongly wants that should be included beyond like what I rattled off?
Could you rattle it off one more time?
Yeah, I think the only thought process I think I have for well protection
Mm-hmm.
is to limit certain things that would be put into areas in the town where we could potentially get water from, like the Village of Chester has their wells in the town of Chester.
Right.
We should keep that in mind with maybe incorporate an overlay district with this also, that eliminates fuel tanks in the ground, it eliminates,
Well, fuel tanks are
they are
no.
now, but
Mm.
but you don't
Well,
want to,
I take that back.
yeah, you don't want a gas station in the vicinity of, there's certain things you just don't want in areas. So do we want to incorporate any type of an overlay district to protect sources of water with our zoning at this point also?
Okay, we can look at that. Most,
Because we also have town wells at each of our districts, and we want to make sure that we're not putting something that's
Most
permitted
wells-
there that shouldn't be permitted there.
most wells have a pretty wide, and I don't know the number off the top
It's
of my
like
head.
1,000 feet. And I think the most stringent part, like 300 feet, and you go up to 1,000 feet.
Yeah.
Unless you expand that because of the aquifer basically going into those areas. And that's something to be determined.
We can coordinate, we can talk to Kristen about,
It's just, again, it's something that the planning board doesn't have in place now
mhm.
to regulate. And I know from past experience with the village as well, we have fuel tanks that were put in the ground
Okay.
within that area.
So I have here just well protection aquifer overlay zone, potential overlay zone for purpose of protecting
And I know
existing water sources.
again that Don Sirota knows a lot, when I was water commissioner, Don had always sent,
Mhm.
it happened once at one building, and then from that point on, they always sent me for a review of what was going on, and they made it a point not to let that take place again, because it took place at one particular building
Yeah.
in the area.
Okay.
So, I mean, it was corrected in that manner, but let's put something substance that'll control what happens to protect all our sources of water.
Okay, we can certainly look into that. I will need to coordinate with Kristen on appropriate locations for
Okay.
a well protection overlay zone. And sometimes too, that includes filing restrictions. When you get approval, you file a declaration that, hey, this property is in the such and such overlay zone. You shall not do X, Y, Z.
Okay.
And we can try to,
There could be special considerations for septic systems and everything.
I don't know that I'd go create individual zones because there's health department regulations for septic systems.
Okay.
It would get, you'd have an overlay over the entire
Well,
town.
you don't want, again, I guess it comes down to when I was working on an overlay district for the town, they didn't want a sewer facility. Basically, if you're developing a piece of property, you're going to have your own sewer plant. You don't want it over top of an aquifer.
Right,
Because back in the day, the town was planning off of Tetz Road of potentially putting a sewer plant, doing their own, pulling from the county and doing that. And that was basically close to the village aquifer at the time.
okay. I think we can come up with something for aquifer protection overlay and we can go. I don't know that we need to it'll get lost if we do
Every little piece.
every little septic system, but I think you focus on where the aquifer is.
Yeah.
So do it the opposite of what you're saying, which
Yeah.
is,
You
where's
want
the
special
aquifer?
consideration for anything within that zone
okay.
to be looked at by the planning board and make sure that they're aware that that takes place.
All right. Okay. I'm getting there, I promise. Okay. This is also in chapter 9. One of the recommendations was, and most of this I just copied and pasted from the plan itself as I went through. This plan supports continued growth of commercial development within the areas already designated for such purpose, with a focus on tourism, hospitality, and recreational uses. Zoning tables should be reviewed to ensure a broad range of contemporary commercial uses which encourage and support these targeted industries. Bars, outdoor dining, and recreation uses should be permitted in these zones. Auto-centric uses and uses which may have a negative impact on these industries and the overall public enjoyment of the commercial district, such as excavation and mining operations, should no longer be permitted in commercial districts. This plan also supports the adoption of design guidelines for these commercial corridors in order to provide guidance for creating aesthetically pleasing and functional commercial corridors. It is recommended such guidelines include both standards, requirements, and guidelines suggestions to guide the planning board's review of any new commercial developments. If you want design guidelines, which focuses more on the architectural, and I have this in a couple of my other municipalities where planning board also serves the function as architectural review board on a certain level of project.
They've been
Yeah.
doing that.
The problem is it says, okay, it has the architectural review section is about this long. I'll take a quick look at yours. But it doesn't tell them what is, amenable to the board. And half the time developers just tell me what you want me to build.
Yeah.
What do you want it to look like? And often it's pictorial. It has pictures of various architectural styles. And so you should hire a planning consultant who specializes in, if you're interested in that, that would be a standalone document. Because trying to codify and regulate design guidelines is very hard. Often it is a series of pictures.
I think before we would do that, I think I would reference that over to the planning board, and because they've been dealing with this.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, applicants are more than happy to build what you want, what people want to see, and that all comes down to the public hearing time also, where people have a chance to voice colors, shapes. They have a voice in what takes place on properties.
I agree.
So your architectural review, just take a look at it, has all this, this is going to sound crass and it's not meant to. It doesn't do very much. It says you have the power to review and conduct surveys and all of these, right? But at the end of the day, it doesn't tell them how. So for example, I'll use Sugarloaf. Sugarloaf Historic District. If you're building something new in there, it should match, and Florida, I use Florida. Florida is Victorian architecture because that's the predominant architecture. You don't want to get so far into the weeds that you're trying to tell an applicant, you can only do this architectural style, right? You want to be broader than that, but you want to provide examples. Tell them what you don't want. So again, your architecture code is there on its face. There's not much, it's fluff. It's a little bit of fluff here. If I gave my, so if you want a real architecture review board, and you want those guidelines to give them direction of what's okay and what's not okay.
Can we take from Warwick or something?
Warwick sort it doesn't really have. No, but
So
I
that's
think
kind of-
Fishkill has decent, there's a couple of municipalities that have design guidelines.
I would take a
It's
look
going
and
to
see
be
what's.
beyond this anyway. It's going to be a
Correct,
separate document. So
correct,
we don't really have
correct.
to worry about that right now.
Yeah. But just be aware that that's something for the board. Yeah. Okay. One thing I've highlighted in my memo is there was a recommendation, the sign code be reviewed and updated. And then also further, the sign code should be unique to Sugarloaf because Sugarloaf is a different scale from, you don't want the same signs in the industrial park that you do in Sugarloaf. They're two completely different areas of your town. One thing the board might consider, for example, some towns and villages have districts. This is sign district number 1. These are all the regs that apply to sign district 1. This is sign district 2. This is sign district 3.
I thought when we were doing that we broke out Sugarloaf like that as such, as a separate entity from
Okay.
from the town because of those anomalies.
When was that done?
One of the work sessions. I did go to some of them, Kevin.
I thought
Well,
it
you,
meant, like,
the,
before
your plan does recommend that it,
process, like years ago.
No, the one we were doing.
Well, would it be the Sugarloaf Business District?
I imagine.
you do have, so you are broken out by zoning district. You may wish to have the sign district not necessarily follow the zoning district, given where it is. You have regulations for your residence district, not too terribly many. You have one for your RO and your LB districts. GC, OP, and IP districts are lumped together. And then you have one for LB and SL. That was in 2011.
Isn't it better to keep them separate for each district or without trying to do it with?
If you
One
want to
thing
keep
fits
them,
all.
if you want to keep, your current structure is based on districts. If you want to,
Different districts would clarify different things.
okay.
Different types of signs where if you combine it, it's gonna leave it
Okay.
where,
And I will run through the sign code. But yes, so
Yeah, like
you want to
forcing-
leave it, is the general,
enforcing one type of sign on everybody where different districts might, like you said, Sugarloaf is gonna want one type of sign. You're not gonna want that in I zone.
well, your current district, so take a look
Yeah.
at your current,
So-
your signs are at 98-21, okay? Residence districts are treated one way. RO and LB districts are in the next group, but they're lumped together. GC, OP, and IP. So general commercial, office park, industrial park, those are lumped as a third group. Sure, the LB Sugarloaf district, that's the fourth group.
Yeah, just-
And then these signs are permitted in any district. They're usually, for example, political campaign signs of such size are permitted, that kind of thing. Then there's a section, signs prohibited in any district.
I just don't, from going to planning board meetings, I just never seen signage as being an issue. I've seen it in the village because there's so much in the village along Brookside and everything, so I just haven't seen that in the town. We don't have a big
Right.
industrial park. And I think some of the businesses that are going along Kings Highway and stuff, it's gonna be individual signage, and I don't know that there's ever been.
Does that speak to digital?
Yes, I just saw a digital provision. Give me a second. There's a digital standard in the GCOP and IP that was added in 2015.
Yeah, that might have been to do with billboards. There's a set guideline on how bright it can be, how many lumens it can be. There was a whole situation on, and how tall they can be. So that was for billboards. I'm not sure if it would cover
So
all digital.
take
signs.
a look at that section. Make sure that the districts that are lumped together and treated the same are appropriate to be treated the same. If they're not, we can pull somebody out, add somebody back in, because they do lump some of the commercial districts together. They lump some of the residential districts
I
together.
don't think we want to see digital signs at any of our businesses.
Um,
Yeah, the only thing we really have is really Sugarloaf.
I was gonna say.
Yeah. I
The
mean,
digital are
signs are
That was on the
obnoxious. As far as flashing, how, they're set on how many times they can change and everything else.
We have, well, you have the,
Every so many seconds,
you do have the Sugarloaf Firehouse has the digital sign there.
but that's something different in effect.
Yeah, no,
It's
but I
not-
mean, that's the only thing.
So what I would
digital think
suggest
see
if
in
the
town.
digital go through, it's
And in the
section,
village,
it's
that's
section
fine.
9821.
Yeah.
Go through,
Well, no,
even if you
I'll go
print
through
it and like take a
Yeah,
red
but
pen to it,
Okay.
mark it up,
Not even, I don't think it's multicolored. though.
mark it up for me.
I don't see signage being a big issue, but we definitely need to
Clarified.
clarify it.
Yeah, at least if there's a guide there and it comes up, at least then it's, the language is there.
Yeah. Signs I find there's either way too little in a code. You're actually, I think you're based on, or there's way too much. I have one municipality that has 18 pages of sign code.
I think actually like McDonald's in the village, once they put the interchange in, they're setting a hole now. I think they may have gotten a variance to extend their sign 5 or 10 feet higher because people couldn't see their sign anymore.
Right.
So, all right. So just, why don't you do me the, like, go through and mark up what the digital, so I have a clear understanding of, and then again, just let me know if the current clustering of districts, everybody's happy with. So just go through and look at that on your own time. Sorry to be giving you guys homework. We've already had this conversation. Discussion of construction of sidewalks. It would be helpful if the board members could identify, and I know it's going to be predominantly Sugarloaf, if there are any other areas in town where you should say, hey, you need a sidewalk. Now, the only thing with saying, okay, you're doing a development is you're going to get a piece of sidewalk here. You're going to get a piece of sidewalk here, and they're going to be sidewalks to nowhere. For example, Town of Walk Hill, they're doing sidewalks to nowhere because eventually they just keep adding up and eventually they will add up into a sidewalk. The other option is to develop a fund so that you contribute to a fund and then the town, when it's appropriate, and maybe at the time you accept dedication of an easement, you accept the right, as a project comes, you got to give the town a right of way to build that sidewalk. So we get that as a condition of your approval.
I just don't.
Because
For myself, I'm trying to think, there's no place in the town
other than Sugarloaf,
that really takes you, I mean, basically there's a sidewalks to nowhere in Sugarloaf. They're taking somebody through Sugarloaf,
It is.
but they're not.
But we do have some other projects out there. Black Meadow Road, we have that one that came before us, and then,
Baroda.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Baroda, where's,
well, I'm just saying, I mean, to me,
It's limited to the,
we
We
can
just-
make a
we-
Sugarloaf sidewalk district. You can,
yeah, I mean, because, if we did that, you do sidewalks there, you got sidewalks in front of those places, and then they're going to nowhere.
again, one of
other
the,
than a sidewalk out, if a bus is not gonna go into a development or something, if you need a sidewalk to bring kids out to a roadway to
Yeah.
pick up, that would be the only place.
the
I could see
biggest,
sidewalks.
the biggest issue with putting sidewalks in after the fact in anywhere is the acquisition of the land to do it. Because if the town or whatever municipality doesn't own the land, they got to either go get the land through acquisition or condemnation. And that's what costs. Prime example was Village of Warwick and the town of Warwick. We're going to do and spent a fair amount of money doing it, designing sidewalks from the center of the village all the way up to all the way out West Street to the school complex, because
wow.
the middle, right? This is great. We got grant money. This is fabulous. And then the acquisition cost of the right of way alone was north of $2 million. The acquisition cost more than the construction costs. So so they have painted sidewalks on their street because that's what they own up to. And that was one of the, when John was presenting and he said, I can't move that because we don't own it. He's trying to avoid roping in additional acquisition costs, because acquisition, not only does it cost money, it costs time. So if you're time sensitive,
And it creates a whole nother headache with maintenance.
yeah. So, okay.
The less sidewalks, the better.
Yeah, I just don't see like I said, you're gonna put, like that one, Baroda, you tell them put sidewalks and they're going to nowhere.
But is there maintenance requirements inside of that code?
Well, we can add,
Sidewalk?
we can add it. That's, again, we have to modify your code if you're gonna have
Yeah.
public sidewalks. It's not in your code, and Chief pointed that out.
catch 22 when you do the sidewalks in housing developments or anything else. It's either dropped on the resident to take care of it and maintain, or it's going to drop back if you do enough of them. It's going to turn into a town issue where the town has to maintain it like the village maintains now. It's complicated.
Yes.
It's not an easy project.
I think it's necessary for the Sugarloaf area, not in the hamlet,
Okay.
personally.
Um,
That's the way that you'll ever get uniform sidewalks over there in the actual part where the shops are. I think that's where it's necessary. I don't see it
elsewhere.
Yeah.
Okay.
personally.
You guys know the town far better than I do, which is why I'm asking these questions.
And again, if this is revised, things could change in the future. If this is revised again in 7 years, they can take it up then.
Okay.
Or if you could generically,
You won't be here in 7 years?
I'll still be in town.
What about here
Here,
in the town hall?
that's all up to the people.
So there's a discussion here. The plan recommends the reestablishment of an architectural review advisory committee to review proposed modifications or structures, protect the integrity of the historic district into the future. The committee should consist of 3 to 5 residents within the architectural, landscape, architectural, or planning professions, or the local historical society. So, couple of questions. This was in the Sugarloaf section. Does the board wish to limit this type of review to Sugarloaf, or should it be applied townwide?
Sugarloaf, I don't think it needs to be townwide.
Okay.
Did the comprehensive plan committee, did they recommend townwide?
It was in the Sugarloaf section.
It
I think it was just Sugarloaf, Brandon, if I
don't
remember.
see it townwide. You already have different designations.
Yeah.
Now,
Okay, so only applies in Sugarloaf.
but will that,
Now,
so there's going to be a review board, but what teeth does that review board have? to-
well, that's getting into my next question.
Mhm.
You currently have assigned to your planning board architectural review. Is this a committee? And it's really not a committee, it would be an architectural review board. Are they calling for, and it's not clear whether, are they calling for a separate committee? All right, and reassign the duties of architectural review to a separate committee? Or is this referring to, because your planning board already has a level of architectural review in your code. Now, there might be some refinements to that authority. Do you want to create yet another, a committee
I would
and then
rather-
pull it away from planning board?
I'd rather keep it with planning board.
Okay.
And let's not complicate things any more than they have to be. The process is complicated enough for it.
Why don't we just have Michael do it on his own? Just be him.
You're back.
You will be eventually. I think it should be kept within the planning board as well.
Okay, so that may be a section, that we need to modify the modified draft comp plan. Because you have a comp plan saying we should reactivate this committee, and we're saying we don't want another committee. We
I think their intent, if I remember, from the meetings was, they just want they want it reactivated within the planning board. I could be wrong, but
Okay, then it should be, but they don't need to reactivate it because it's already there.
I understand.
I don't want to complicate the planning board with another board or committee.
Yeah, no,
Well, the planning board right now is wearing 2 hats, but they can do that simultaneously.
Yeah,
No, that's what.
You
that's
don't
what
want
Tom means.
to, okay, you
don't
don't
wanna
want a second
complicate
committee, okay. See, these are the types of questions.
no, you're doing good, Liz. We're gonna be out of
Well,
here.
4 minutes.
We're gonna be out of here before midnight.
Where are we in the plan right now?
I'm on 10, so there's
Out
only
of
12
what?
chapters.
Oh, yeah?
Very good.
Yeah,
That's
I'm,
good. Good.
Keep it
I
moving.
hope you're paying attention, Supervisor.
I am.
I just hope
On the
Linda kept
time of
better
the
notes
meeting.
than I did because I'm gonna have to put all this into writing. Recommended principles to be used to establish historic preservation guidelines. That was at page 63. Kristen subsequently clarified that this applied to Sugarloaf. My question to the board is there any other area where we need historic preservation considerations, or is it really only the historic district?
I would think just the historic district.
Okay.
For the town, I mean, the village might have some stuff, but that's a separate.
There-
There are some other buildings, but they're spread throughout. It's
Okay,
not a section of.
so for right now, we're gonna leave it at the historic district, for right now. If there are other properties that you wish to, and I can give you some samples of local laws where you can individually designate historic properties, that would require historic, that would have, guidelines. I just, again,
Can't people do that through the state on their own also?
well,
Historic designations for their property if they want to do it on an individual basis.
yes, but it's not the same effect. There's both, you want a local,
Okay,
so
if we think of anything that we want to put into that, we,
just trust me, it's actually easier to get stuff taken down at the state. Like if you want to preserve a building, the state, you want local.
that might come from recommendations from
Yeah.
itself.
Subdivision code, we did already talk about. Again, we got to make sure that we're looking at, that the three documents are consistent: comp plan, zoning, subdivision.
Yeah.
Because if they're inconsistent, your planning board will not like you very much. It'll put the planning board in a tough spot. Again, we talked about buildable area, and what does that entail? All right. And so we can, I will give you a guideline. I will start with what I have seen, and then if we want to go more or pull back, we can do that. Okay, we talked about short-term rentals already. All right, you ready? The next one, this is a fun one, particularly in the current market. Let's talk about chickens.
No.
Yeah, that was a pretty interesting
That's
conversation
just,
with the
Let's
committee.
let's just, I'm gonna dive
want
right in.
chickens,
I
let 'em
know
have
eggs are
chickens.
expensive.
They want chickens, let them have chickens.
So the recommendation came as regulate the residential, non-agricultural keeping of fowl, livestock, and total animals. My comment to the board was the plan should describe what we are trying to regulate and make specific recommendations. Is it an outright prohibition, restrictions, or broad acceptance?
I don't know, the village is pretty open on this.
Where are we right now?
So this was found in section 12.2.1, which is recommendations for your residential zone.
Go back to it. So I can-
Oh, sorry.
It said they had limits per acre, how many chickens you could have and everything else.
We can do a limits, we can do a.
We already have that, I believe.
Yeah, so that's in
Okay.
this zoning
Yeah.
stuff.
That was the point that Veronica brought up during the meeting.
Right. The only comment I would make on it, we should probably, you said the village has,
Village, I
can
think it's
look.
pretty open. They could,
oh, okay. I was gonna say we should try to, I mean,
Well, remember also though that, and I don't want
maybe
to,
it's areas, but I know there's different places where there's chickens. And
That's unusual.
it's allowed in that zoning.
I just want to be clear and I don't want to direct the board where to go. Typically, if there are agriculture, chickens, roosters, that kind of thing, the regulations are in the villages, which are a higher density, tighter than in the town. And the town is more
You would think.
open because it's less dense. So I have a note here, confirm village restrictions.
Other than our individual districts like Surrey Meadows, if they're closer together.
and I know somebody had chickens in there. I don't know if they're still doing that.
Let me see if I can,
That's where you would have your area.
let me see if I can find it real quick.
Well, they were pulling the stickers off the eggs today. Was in the shop right asking what he's doing. He said, we're raising prices again.
I do not see, I'm like word searching. Hold on, that's not the whole section.
I
Let's
don't
see.
know if to do with that.
Fowl.
Fowl,
Fowl?
FOWL.
print,
FOWL.
fowl. Sometimes it's no roosters because the roosters get really loud.
Sometimes that's all you have.
Birds.
5 o'clock in the morning.
I see a general definition of domestic animal, but that doesn't tell me anything. I'm gonna just word search chicken.
So something to think about.
So,
What do you think about chickens, Andrew?
I think you gotta limit to the size of the lot.
okay,
That's how it is already.
I'm not
That's
seeing,
all.
I'm not seeing it unless it's in a different code.
I know for a fact that was a
Yeah, I saw
giant
it.
part of the discussion.
Okay,
Andrew, maybe you can pull that and send that to her. In the code. You don't have to do it right this second,
I
but
did homework too. but
Yeah, yeah.
so just restrictions on acres. Like if you have a 1/4 acre lot, you're not getting a lot of birds.
right.
Yeah, I think like an AR3 zone is based off. of the size
Oh,
of the
here,
lot.
Tom, let me see that. That's why I'm not it's because I'm not word searching the right thing.
Yeah, I see it referenced in there in a few places.
It was added, the recommendation. Keeping of fowl and micro livestock. There's something that needs to be defined. What is micro livestock? I have a rough idea.
Frogs.
Really?
Seriously?
No idea.
Somebody could have a mink farm, somebody could,
Yeah.
raise raccoons.
A maximum of 8 for a 1.5 acre lot, maximum of 16 for a 2 acre lot, maximum of 24 for a 3 acre lot. Structure and pen to house fowl must have a minimum of a 40-foot.
Setback.
It's typo again. Setback and 100 feet from the front yard. So I will.
You have to
I
meet
will
all
look
those
at that.
criteria.
Like I said, I know it's a small issue, but it's a very contentious issue about chickens.
Some people
When
like
we're
it.
off record, I will share with some of you my chicken story for my cul-de-sac. I'm getting there. I'm on page 11 of 13. We should review and just look at regulations. Are there any specific recommendations for the plan for long-term outdoor storage of products and equipment on industrial sites? And they're just, it says, a couple of the recommendations said just review. Okay, well, what, is there a specific recommendation that they want the board to implement other than us reviewing? Because, okay, I've reviewed it.
I think if it's on a site plan where they're gonna store things, that's one thing, but if they're storing outside of potential areas that they were supposed to, it shouldn't be allowed.
On a temporary basis maybe, but that would be it.
Yeah. Just some additional notes, and these are changes that I will coordinate with Kristen as we get closer to make the draft comprehensive plan. Some of these were moving targets. We may, depending on where we are at the time of adoption, want to include a footnote that sale of the pack is under consideration, not binding the board to anything, just saying that the board is evaluating options, just for the historical guidance and reference. We should update the plan, and I think Kristen has already done this, to acknowledge the historic district acceptance, because as she was writing it, the district was accepted, and the current draft doesn't have that in there, but I think she's already made that change. Implementation schedule, this is just cleanliness. There's a table that identifies legislative action policy. In my mind, policy implies action that can be accomplished by resolution. Your procurement policy, your personnel policy. If it requires legislative action, it should be. If we're gonna make that distinction and go through a table and say this is a policy versus a legislative action, we should make sure that they're all clear. We've already talked about property maintenance. Are there any other priorities for the board that I haven't discussed real quickly? And I just want you to know it's 3:57. I told you 2
Did a
hours.
good job.
I'm good.
I think right now, I think we're good. We got our homework, so
Okay.
The only other question I have, are we going to make our deadline of our moratorium with what we're trying to accomplish here?
It is doable. It would be incredibly tight. You would have to give me nothing else between now and June.
That's not happening. We know that's not reality.
We might have to bring in some help.
So we may, and you certainly can do it. What I would recommend, depending on where we are, at our second April meeting.
Extend.
Well, no, we've already extended. We'd have to,
We extended it twice already.
we have to
don't
go to
have-
a new local
We don't have
law.
an extension at this point.
But you can do a shorter period.
I was gonna say maybe a shorter period wouldn't have to be, what are we doing, 6 months?
I'd give you the flexibility, but knowing that you're close. You just, if you want to make that goal,
You may need another 3 months, so you could do a
I-
6 month with
you know-
3 month increments if necessary, but I'd like to avoid that if we can. Because we're gonna be at 18 month.
which is nothing. You're fine. You're totally fine. I think what you want to do is put the time into it.
Get it
And
right the first time.
Get it right.
Okay.
And I
If we
would
have
much
to,
rather go through the effort. And yes, so in our second meeting in April, we'll make the decision. We will introduce, just Linda, note the schedule so I don't forget. If we need to introduce the local law, it's going to be introduced at our first meeting in May for public hearing and adoption at our second meeting in June
and we still
for
have to
filing,
wait-
for filing with the Secretary of State so that there's no lap.
We still have to wait for the planning board to get us their recommendations also.
Right. So
But
here's
from there-
what has to here's what has to happen. Kristen's working on seeker, but Kristen is a little stuck because she needs some of this depending on how far we go.
Yep.
I'm going to draft this. I'm going to try to work on this a fair amount over the next couple of weeks. Once we introduce it by the town board is going to refer the zoning and any other local laws that affect zoning to the planning board to review. They do have a 62-day review period, which is why I'm saying it's tight. And having done this with other municipalities, it is not fair to ask your planning board to review a comp plan and a zoning code in one meeting or two, or even two. Monroe, we had a series of special meetings.
So what we've given them now is just generic, give you comments, but we haven't really got into
It's
the
an
process right
informal,
now.
yeah,
It
you're
wasn't a
not in your
formal
it's not a
referral.
formal referral. The planning board can say, hey, we noticed this, we don't like this, you might consider this for your draft, but that is entirely voluntary. And
Well, we'd appreciate that, so
so,
once we get the actual
you have
document
to-
that you're gonna work on now, that's gonna be the
Yeah.
document that the planning board's gonna say, yeah, we like it or we don't like it.
but this is a big,
It's a big thing to cover.
yeah. So your zoning code right now, I think is roughly 180 pages. So just when I say that I need time to draft it, I need
Come on,
time.
Liz. I thought you were a superwoman.
We'll take the phone out of Brandon's office, we'll take his cell phone, and maybe you can get it done by that time.
Just the email. Just
Well-
take his email away from him.
Right.
That's like taking a baby's bottle. I
Over
don't think,
my-
I don't think we're taking the email.
We're gonna hide this-
You can pry it from my cold deck.
we're gonna hide that computer.
Anyway,
I think for now we've gotten a lot accomplished. I've got some good direction. I've given you some homework assignments. If you get an idea, please shoot an email, and an email is best because that way if you tell it to me at a meeting and I say, please shoot that to me in an email, it's so I have it and I can refer to it and
And label it what? Comprehensive plan or?
comprehensive plan or zoning. And then Kristen hasn't experienced this yet. When I'm in these reviews, often as I'm reviewing, I find typos and other things and other little things because you will have read this document
Yeah.
15, 20 times and you read it over the same passage over and over. I'll email the planner and I'll go, I just noticed this on page 52. I just noticed this and I'll send a couple of those a week.
It'll
So,
happen.
what?
I said it'll happen.
We'll get there. We might need to extend briefly on the moratorium, but I think the extension is worth it, and I think you're well within appropriate timeframes.
Yeah, if we extended it 6 months and we got it done in 2 months, we can vote the two away.
The
with
moratorium
extension.
ends the moment you adopt the zoning code.
Oh, so,
You lift the moratorium the moment you adopt the
okay,
zoning.
so we're not locked into leaving. it.
No,
Okay.
no, 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 no.
Yeah, I'm good. I'll make a motion.
No, hold on.
Tom's got to go cook.
No,
He's
no,
5
no.
minutes late
Hold
already.
on.
I'm late.
What in the very beginning we talked about lot and building coverage.
Mhm.
What was I guess the
So sometimes lot
next step for
coverage,
that?
so I'm gonna treat it as the more restrictive, which is lot coverage, which is the building, impervious, anything like that, as in the lot
Sheds,
percentages.
pools.
I will check with Kristen whether, because, can I just, your zoning code, which does coverage by percentage, this may not be an appropriate percentage with using the more restrictive. Also, it's not clear what the heck, oh, I get it.
Get the reference that. Yeah.
I'm not loving it.
Well, this was to,
Some of that's a
this is for
style.
review to make changes.
Yeah.
Whether we wanted to see it in the red is what would be eliminated, green is the new.
No, the red is what's available for. Yeah, it's just,
Not the
it's
green was
confusing.
the new
Green is new, but red is,
removal.
it's the different standard if you have sewer and water versus well and septic, which is fine. But what happens if you have well and sewer, or vice versa, water and septic? Do you get the benefit, or do you need both? So that you see those tiny,
Yeah.
little tiny
Nuances.
nuances. I'm assuming it's both sewer and water. But there are lots of properties that particularly in the more rural settings, one may be attached to water, but have a septic, and one may be on sewer and water.
I don't see that being a big issue in the town because most places are individual wells and sewer's the only thing that's kind of available.
So we just need to
But it's
clarify and
it's also
elaborate.
by district, and they would have to be accepted into the district if they're not part of the district. And that's all subject to what happens in the town.
So the question is, do you even need a distinction between the two
Yeah.
and just plan for
Because
sewer
it
and
has
a
to
well
come-
and septic?
You know, anytime something comes, that needs sewer capacity, they come to the town for that capacity.
It's just, it's
the
another
county.
distinction.
Yep.
If it's not going to really be utilized,
Do we need it?
do we need it? Yeah. So,
That's that.
I am good for now.
Were there any other comments from the board? I know that, but from the board members?
No, I'm good.
Is there any public comment, Michelle?
Just John McElroy, given other types of animals like pygmy goats, pot-bellied pigs, American guinea pigs, and miniature horses.
Oh, thank you.
Guinea pigs, yeah, that makes sense, actually.
I just, again, we
Yeah.
should define it or provide examples.
Thank you, John McElroy, for your input.
Because micro farming could be ants,
Hey, that's important.
it's all what's in the
I'll
definition.
make that motion.
Oh, hold on. Is there any public input from out there? No? All right. There's a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.